the inaugural, the first, I guess, first annual MES-hosted, MES-sponsored, and also MES-moderated debate between the two pairs of candidates for SGA exec next year. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to everybody who just hopefully is streaming into our Instagram live stream. We're going to get started just here in a few minutes. I just wanted to quickly lay out sort of the format of how things are going to go. So we're going to begin with 3-minute opening statements from each candidate pair. Once the opening statements are taken care of, we are going to enter straight into sort of general questions about campus in general. Candidates will have 2 minutes each to respond to these questions. Once we take care of these general questions, that's where we are going to dive into each candidate pair's platforms. So once we get into these more specific questions, each candidate pair that we are pointing the questions at will have 3 minutes to answer, and then the other pair will have 1 minute to respond. 2?
2 minutes. Yeah.
2 minutes, and then they still get 1 minute to respond?
And then 1 minute to respond, yes.
Okay.
3 minutes total.
Awesome. So first candidate pair is 2 minutes, the other one gets 1 minute to respond. After those 1 minute responses, then we will close the event with concluding statements from each candidate pair to sort of wrap everything up. So without further ado, I'm going to hop down there and we'll get into it.
So we're going to have Andy and Michael starting with your 2-minute, or 3-minute rather, opening statement. And then I'll give you notes at 30 seconds for then on.
Are we starting now?
Yeah.
Sounds great. Hello everyone, to everyone at the live stream, thank you for tuning in. My name is Andy Nelson, this is Michael Paredes. We are running for SGA President and Vice President. To tell you a little bit about me before we begin, I'm currently a rising junior, majoring in economics and Chinese. Starting as a freshman on this campus, I was super overwhelmed with all of the resources that were provided here. So one of the main platform planks that we are running on is actually finding a way to use the student government organization to streamline a lot of the different services provided to this college in one format together. We believe that student government is a liaison between administration and students, and we feel that student government could also be a liaison between all the different centers, such as the Taylor Center, the Wellness Center, the Piper Center. That's something that we think is really important that students have access to. On top of that, we hope to work with the Office of Student Activities in a manner of varieties. So student government is housed under the Office of Student Activities, and something that is really awesome that we have both been able to engage in this year is leadership development and training from being in student government in different forms. However, if you're not engaged in SGA, it's really hard to get involved in student leadership here on campus, especially within the office. So one of our other planks is to actually create leadership days that are focused on organizing growth and leadership skills to all different students. Because being a leader at St. Olaf means a lot of different things. If you're an athlete, if you're a musician, if you're simply a course taker, there's all different ways to be leaders.
I would also like to introduce myself. I am Michael Paredes. I'm an international student from Belize, and I am here to say that St. Olaf has become my home over the past 4 years. Prior to St. Olaf, I was studying in Singapore, and so I don't have a set grounding of what it is to be a part of any one particular location. But St. Olaf has given me that. Yet, I'm not satisfied fully with the opportunities that I've been able to get at St. Olaf, in part because, like Andy mentions, it is just very difficult and overwhelming to become a part of the St. Olaf community. We're here to try and change that, and that's why we're up here.
Awesome. And then we're going to throw it over to you two for 3 minutes for your opening statement.
Hi, my name is Hannah Niederman. My pronouns are she and they. I'm a political science, women and gender studies, and race and ethnic studies concentration. It's a whole mouthful of things. And I'm running for your president of SGA.
And I'm Maddy Bayzaee. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am running for the position of vice president. I'm majoring in social work and race and ethnic studies. And to tell you about Hannah and I and what we've done and how we've been involved, we consider ourselves student activists on this campus. Between the two of us, we've done things both on and off campus to advocate for reproductive rights, climate justice, curriculum change for historically racist curriculums, and things like making this campus more religiously and culturally inclusive. And we've done these things mainly through a lot of campus organizations and through our own initiative. And so what we see is an opportunity to bring our vision and passion outside of SGA to SGA. That's because we're outsiders. We don't have SGA experience, but we consider that an asset because we have the drive and the passion that will let us use the SGA platform and resource to help centralize a lot of activism and help make SGA a hub for campus activism. Our vision is to create a strong union between SGA and students and initiate and maintain lasting and inclusive changes to this campus.
We also, student activists, have noticed that it can be difficult to pin down exactly where to go as a student when you want to create change. There's a lot of conversation of, this isn't the right place to do that, or you need to go here, which sort of pushes around the student voice to be put from one place to another. And we want to make it so that SGA is a place where you can easily pin that down. Systems of bureaucracy themselves can hold back activism and can silence voices, whether purposefully or not. And if we were leaders in SGA, we would want to make it an accessible hub focused on opening up the school in a way it hadn't been before. We also understand that there may be some goals that we introduce as part of our platform, as part of the way that we speak about why we're running, that are not traditionally goals of SGA, or things that maybe weren't as normalized in what SGA has done. But I think the question we want to ask ourselves with our candidacy and for the school is, why can't those be things? Why can't we expand the role of SGA to respond to what students are needing and asking for? And we want that question to keep being, why can't this be the place for that? We also just want to express our gratitude to Jake and to Claire and to the mess. We also would like to thank Andy and Michael just for doing this with us today. And also we want to remind all of you to vote all the way down ballot on Friday in this week's election.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So we're going to go ahead and dive in with our first question. This one is going to be directed at Hannah and Maddy, but pay attention to it because it's going to be the same one that goes right to you afterwards. So if you're elected to lead St. Olaf's Student Government Association, that is, SGA, maybe you've heard of it, what is the first thing that you would change or the first thing that you would do as president and vice president?
Something immediate that we've found to be a place for improvement on this campus is our compost. This is related to our platform with the natural environment, and that seems very immediate to us because we want to have a week 0 training for first years on how to properly compost. We would like to collaborate with groups like EC who have already floated this idea, but using the SGA president and vice president's connection with both Res Life and admin, we would be able to create a comprehensive program that could be included in week 0 every year so that students continually have a proper training on how to compost, and that is just one thing that we think would help immediately change a bit of the culture of this campus so that we do better by our natural environment. Do you add anything to that?
I would just say that along with that, I think part of our platform, specifically the plank that Maddy is talking about, the natural environment, is we also want to focus not just on the personal impact of climate change. I think there's a lot of language both on the school level and also just generally in our capitalist society in which there's a lot of onus placed on the individual to deal with climate change by your individual actions. And I think that part of, in addition to the composting program that Maddy was just talking about, I also think that part of our goal is to work to make sure that the school isn't sort of greenwashing systems. So to critically investigate if those systems to work towards environmental changes at the school are actually serving us. So things like divesting from fossil fuels is something that is very pertinent on our mind because the climate cannot wait and neither can we.
Great, thank you guys. And then the same question is going to go to you two, which is just first thing that you're going to do if you get elected as SGA president and vice president.
To start, 2 things actually come really close to mind, and I don't know which is more important, so I'm going to say both. The first thing I would do if elected as president is reestablish a really strong connection with administration and the student government. SGA has a really unique position in that it's written in the bylaws that we are supposed to meet with the president of this college monthly, as well as many members of the deans of student life, as well as other different administrative members. Force does this on a monthly basis. However, I think it's really important that the president and vice president, as the voices of all students, are ones who are speaking to them consistently and clearly to speak on what students are wanting to tell their admin. The second thing is the Senate initiatives that have already been made and haven't been correctly used currently. Students have done a lot for students in the past, and we think that SGA has a super unique opportunity to put some students who are really passionate about speaking on different things. For example, race. I think that's something a lot of people want to talk about at Olaf, but a lot of people don't know how. STAR, which is the SGA Task Force Against Racism, is an awesome initiative that was created after the 2017 protests here at St. Olaf that many of us, while not students, currently probably have knowledge of. And I think if we find students who are really passionate about leading those conversations and putting them in something where there's already a platform for them to speak and amplify their voices with SGA backing and financial resources, that would be an outstanding way to start off the next school year.
I would like to add to that as VP and as head of the Senate, it would be one of my first priorities to ensure that students are aware that Senate elections are coming up in the fall. And so I would be working very, very closely with the grassroots movements on campus, trying to find the senators willing to represent our voices who we can then work
so much.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for answering the first question there. We're going to go ahead and bounce this second one over to Michael and Andy. So you guys both have experience in SGA, Michael in Senate and Andy as a current coordinator. So you guys have some experience with maybe structural barriers that are preventing meaningful change from happening. How do you guys plan to sort of move down those barriers and get actual meaningful change done if you are elected as president and vice president with your current SGA level of experience?
I can start off. I'll start off with this from a Senate perspective. What I can say with Senate is that Senate in its purest form is meant to represent student voices. Students are more than welcome to attend Senate meetings every week. You're more than welcome to submit proposals, and you're more than welcome to be a part of the decision-making process by speaking with your senator. This has not been a tradition here at St. Olaf, and we think one of the barriers to that is because most students aren't even aware of who their senator is. They're not particularly certain about how to submit their proposals and ideas for funding. Senate has the project allocation fund that we are able to commit to every year to provide students the opportunity and the financing to do all of their craziest ideas, yet students aren't aware of this. One of the ways that we're trying to tackle this is by providing a marketing campaign that will reinvigorate the student community, not only with the knowledge about what resources are available, but with the immediate tools such as quick links and addresses that we are able to then see your perspectives and your ideas and introduce it in our Senate. You could maybe talk about the exec.
Yeah, and on the exec side, I think it's something really similar. I look at, especially this year being the Student Activities Committee coordinator, I have been very focused on my own branch. I've been very focused on what we're trying to do. How do you program in a time of COVID? It's a really tricky question. I think we found some interesting answers to it this year. But I think about what has been the main discussion within exec this year, and it's been trying to define the relationship between administration and the current execs in SGA. Currently, the president, Méliès, has been doing a fantastic job working at trying to find a real way to put down on paper and ink the true definition between the two. Because as we saw with the Mental Health Week, there was actually like a really fantastic SGA proposal that passed. However, because of our relationship and no clear examples and standards of how the administration is supposed to react, we didn't see a true administration response to that proposal.
Awesome, thank you guys. And then in a similar vein, you're not going to respond directly to that. We're going to ask you a question in a similar vein, and you're going to get 2 minutes, which is, as people without formal SGA experience, sort of how do you foresee that being a barrier, and how do you plan to work within a system that perhaps you're not as familiar with?
Yeah, I think on that, for Maddy and my background, we both, as said in our intro speech, are people who are deeply involved with the campus, just not in the ways that are traditionally done through SGA. So we are both in things like we are both on the board of St. Olaf Democrats. I'm going to be the Interfaith Fellow for next year, as well as being on the advisory committee for the Lutheran Center, which allocates funding and the goals for the committee, in which I will be working directly with people like the Vice President for Mission. And along with that, I think there are many ways in which we are involved in campus organizations that are creating that grassroots activism. So I think we are thinking about ways in which we can bring that activism to SGA and also represent allyship in our position. And so I think that outsiders can actually make us more appealing, because if you are going to be coming to someone in a system like SGA that is sometimes so difficult to understand. I think a lot of our campaign, getting ready for this campaign and campaigning, has been trying to figure out those structural barriers, trying to figure out what exactly is going on and making things accessible. And I think that starts with having people who seem accessible and who you know from the organizations very well in positions of power to know that they are allied on certain issues that your organization is talking about.
Yeah. And to add to that, I would say that because we are outsiders, we've had to approach SGA with very fresh eyes. And so that means that when we're leafing through things like the bylaws, or when we're talking to people who have had SGA experience, we get a lot of this is confusing, or we don't understand this. And I think that we also can use that to reestablish what things mean. I've had senators tell me that they're confused by Senate laws. I'm confused by Senate laws, Senate laws. And so I think something that I would be interested in doing is enumerating what those are and explaining what the actual potential is of something like Senate, so that more students can understand the potential it has, and so that I, as the chair of Senate, would be able to facilitate greater change.
Thank you guys so much. It's great to hear your expressions of your sort of perspective on campus as insiders and maybe as relative outsiders. So this next question is going to deal with an issue that's been on campus for a while. So over the past calendar year, 4 faculty and staff have departed the college, explicitly citing St. Olaf's poor treatment of its BIPOC students, faculty, and staff, and lack of institutional support for actual change. Students have echoed these concerns, both via social media and via live demonstrations, such as the 7 Feet for 7 Shots March at the beginning of the fall semester. As SGA President and Vice President, how will you respond to these expressions and affect meaningful change surrounding race on the Hill? We will start with Michael and Andy regarding this question.
Yeah, I can start. I suppose I should begin by saying that I come very much from a place of privilege, being a white male on this campus. I don't face a lot of the issues that many BIPOC students do. However, I've spent a lot of time speaking with many of my friends who consider themselves BIPOC students, as well as members of the current exec team who don't identify as white. And they've spent a lot of time saying that they themselves really are not quite sure what they want. We've spent a lot of time looking through the last 10 to 15 years, as many records as SGA has, of Senate meetings, exec meetings, looking through what have people talked about in the past and what can we do now to continue to foster change and dialogue on this campus. And one of the things that we noticed from Bruce King's leaving statement is that he talked about the amount of recruitment that they've done in the last 15 years. Within the last 15 years, they've done a fantastic job of bringing BIPOC and multicultural students to this campus. However, once those students get here, besides the Taylor Center, they have nothing. And before the Taylor Center was here just a few years ago, it was CME. And CME was pretty much an othering institution on this campus. If you weren't white, you went to CME. And that's not something that we think defines Olaf culture. And we're not quite sure what the answer is, but we know it's something that we need to focus on particularly.
I'd just like to add that Jake, you're hitting the nail right on the head, because it's not a perspective of how do we make a community that's welcoming for students. It's a perspective on how do we make students feel like the campus has accepted them, has given them the opportunity to make it a home, has given them the opportunity to actually reach all of their dreams and goals in a community that is seeking their success. That's what we want to try and create, in part by giving students the opportunity to be able to be received very well in other centers, in other resources, and in other activities, but also by being there, having myself experience what you're talking about. We will be there in the forefront to talk to students, be there with them, and to create this community that we're trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Michael, we'll bounce the same question over to Maddy and Hannah.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, when a lot of the resignation letters and discussions were happening on campus, I really wanted, as my own person, to take time to educate myself as much as I could on this issue. That was part of my intent behind, declaring my race and ethnic studies concentration and institutionalizing in some ways in academic classes the knowledge that I wanted to learn from such amazing professors in that field. But I also did a research project on sort of my own accord, learning about the history of protests on St. Olaf's campus and the history of institutional racism on this campus. And as part of that, I got to have a close working relationship with the creators and some of the members of the task force to confront structural racism. And I was able to realize how they were doing absolutely amazing work and were fighting against, in some ways, their own safety in their jobs or in the position on St. Olaf's campus in order to fight for these things. And so I think upholding the work that they're doing is something that would be incredibly important to me. And along with that, one of the things that we talked about in our platform which is part of something that I came to after doing research for the research project, is that something like Borsk right now has done a lot of good and is a way in which the students can access the administration, but also they don't have an actual voice in something like the Board of Regents. And so one of the goals that we have is having a student sit on the Board of Regents and being able to actually actively be a voice and not be able to be excluded. And I think that would be an example of a lasting change which could create that environment, which could be generation after generation being able to express ways in which students can become more welcome at this school.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I'd add to that I got a lot from my classes in the Race and Ethnic Studies department is it's so important to have a historical understanding of this institution as a historically white place. If you have a historical understanding and you're able to pinpoint exactly what happened at these times, you can kind of figure out the way that you sit as a privileged or as a marginalized student. You can figure out the way you sit historically, and having that understanding of everything will help create individuals who are more accepting of their peers, and ultimately one person can change many, and we can all have a more accepting campus in that way.
All right, great. Thank you both. we're going to throw it back to you with the next question. It's going to be another one posed to both of you, which is we're going to talk about SOAP a little bit. So Senate recently voted against the proposed St. Olaf activities programming body that would have completely restructured the way that we do event programming. The primary contention with SOAP was that the members of its executive committee were not going to be elected by the student body, but instead appointed. So you've all expressed sort of differing views on SOAP, right? So we're just going to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on your stances and what you view the impact of either electing or appointing student leaders as being. So that's going to go to you two first.
Yeah, so I'll answer this from the inside perspective, having been there while SOAP was tabled, reproposed, and then passed, or ultimately failed to pass. What we believed when we first brought up SOAP is that SGA is a very old model. It's existed for a very long time and doesn't really account for the evolving culture that St. Olaf has. SGA, in its best instances, works to bring student voices to the forefront, but these student voices often aren't the most equipped to present themselves for an election. They're not the best suited to be able to defend themselves against the ravages of competition or other instances that prevent people from running usually. This is one of the reasons why SOAP originally had a hiring model, to be able to get people to apply, increase the diversity pool, and be able to pull from the best student candidates. I believed that this was a very good model. Despite the immediate lack of democracy upon voting, we believe that the democracy in enabling everyone to apply without the hindrance of stigmas from any election, from any dissuasion during that process, would have actually increased, in my opinion, diversity, since it's a much more streamlined process. Overall, we agree that the lack of democracy is a problem, and that's why SOAP ultimately failed. But we do believe that we have to invigorate Senate and SGA to be able to provide much more streamlined answers, like SOAP was trying to provide, in combining all of the organizations, making each coordinator more familiar with each other, and set in that way that there isn't any overlapping programming, and students are able to best receive the results that they are looking for.
I have a very interesting take on this, as I was part of the original working group that actually created SOAP, so I have many opinions on this current subject. I would challenge students to actually go look at other SGA models at different institutions and notice that programming has nothing to do with SGA. I think that's a bad thing. I would say that at St. Olaf it's important to keep it, but I would say that if you're a programmer, you need experience if you're going to lead an entire committee.
Awesome. So to you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, so we were kind of outwardly against SOAP during that town hall. That's not a secret. And to that I'll say we care so much about democracy and student voices that we didn't want the immediate threat, because SOAP was kind of presented and then a town hall all within the span of a few days, maybe a week. Because of that, the immediate threat of losing a voice through an election is a pretty existential one on a campus where your voice is your vote and where your vote goes to a kind of confusing SGA. And I sympathize with all of the programmers on this campus because I have heard of how challenging it is to work across these groups. And I am familiar with the fact that there is a current working group going on, and we think that we would support that working group in their decision, and that in haste things can become a little bit messy, especially with the student body who is very for democracy and cares about their right to vote. But with the current working group, we would support them and their findings and their discussions, and we would support a model, an altered model of SGA that does include a new programming branch.
I also think along with that, I understand that it can be probably incredibly frustrating from the model of someone who helped design something to have people come into the town hall and be so fervently against it like Maddy and I were, and along with many other people. But I do think that if the public is so fervently against something, there is a reason for that. And I think that there is inherently a risk when you take away voting on a campus that it can also decrease the participation of certain groups that are harder to hear from. And so I think that we would welcome the idea of restructuring things in a way that makes sense and working along with the working group, but we can't do that at the risk of losing democratic participation. That is one of the first priorities for us.
All right. Thank you both.
I'll echo that. Thank you. So we're going to get into our more pointed questions that are directed at each of your individual platforms now. So we'll start with the first question that is directed at Andy and Michael, your guys' platform. So central to your platform is increasing SGA's presence and transparency on campus, as you made clear sort of in your opening statements, in terms of both connection between SGA and the student body, but also connection sort of within SGA. This has been a persistent issue and was also central to the campaigns of Devin and Ariel 2 years ago, and Melier and Leander most recently. Melier and Imani, in their roles as president and vice president, have made some strides to increase this connection through social media or through publicity for certain Senate initiatives. I'm curious how you guys plan to stand distinct from these other efforts and sort of move the ball forward in terms of transparency and connection in a unique way.
I can start with this. So we kind of have a three-pronged attack. I think, make sure I'm understanding your question. We're thinking about how SGA interacts with both students itself and with administration. May I talk about all three of those things? Is that kind of okay? Perfect. So the first thing that I think we need to discuss is about SGA and students, because there has been a disconnect, I think, this year, and there always seems to be a disconnect, and it's really tricky to try to find the answer why. One of the things that we think is super important is clear, consistent communication. We hope to, we understand that there's a lot of email fatigue, but I think an email from your president, vice president every month is a super important thing. Easy, it can be funny, it can be like Oli the Lion, kind of lighthearted, but we can also mention what we've been doing every single month. Just like what Maria Pavone has done with stepping up in the role of vice president of equity and diversity on this campus. I think that's something that would be really important that we can do. Do you want to talk about the other two aspects?
I would definitely like to add that when it comes to the students and when it comes to facing administration, we, aside from being possibly president, vice president, we are representatives. We are one of the members of this body, and we too share your concerns. So definitely, we currently actually on our campaign have a feedback form where we want to hear from you, even presently, because I am on Senate and he is on exec. We can bring those changes that you would like to see, and we want to hear from them. As it relates to administration, like Andy mentioned before, president and vice president are elected and are mandated by bylaws to be meeting with members of administration every so often. This has not been happening recently, and in previous administrations it has been snubbed for a variety of reasons which could be understood. We intend to re-approach the administration, however, in a way that is firm and unwavering, but that is willing to make compromise as long as we can move forward and as long as student interests are always carried at the forefront. Thank you.
We'll now turn to a brief 1-minute response on the topic from Maddy and Hannah.
I'll begin by saying that as people who don't necessarily have the same SGA experience, we approach things like looking through the bylaws, and we see that we have the capacity to meet with administration, and that is something we want. That is something we will fight for, because that is something we believe is just our right as stated in the bylaws. And so we want to meet with administration, and we also want to have a working relationship with the administration, because in my experience, when we try to make changes, the administration doesn't always respond well to a force. And so to have a working relationship and to collaborate together will allow firm ideas, strong, important ideas that increase equity and inclusion on this campus, meet with the honest, challenging logistics of admin, which we believe are much more than even we can see as students.
Great, thank you guys. So the next question is going to be directly to you both, which is that part of your platform involves supporting student voices. You note there that student voices on this campus that are student voices on this campus that are currently not being heard, and even further being silenced by different bodies across campus. Your platform encourages solidarity with these silenced voices and cites the Board of Regents Student Committee, or BORSC, as it might be more affectionately known, as a specific organization engaging in the work of making voices heard. While your platform urges heightened support for the work of BORSC, what other groups on campus will you engage with to make sure all student voices are being heard in meaningful ways?
Absolutely. I'll start by just saying STAR. You two brought up STAR earlier, and that has been kind of quiet recently. There isn't necessarily the same initiative coming from there, and that, I think, comes from the type of people who are drawn to the committee, the amount of airtime the committee gets, or the task force gets in conversation about what types of organizations and branches there are of SGA. And so STAR is the first thing that comes to mind for places we would like to reinvigorate. BORSC, namely, what do you think?
I think that Maddy and I were also having a discussion earlier about the ways in which we can bring the student organizations that we are involved in to the Senate and to the president and the vice president in whatever form they may be. I think that part of what we talked about was that we would like there to be a way in which we could create a better consultation between either senators and their constituents, or between us and the organizations, in which if there were, for example, a mission to create something related to climate, we could bring in all the climate organizations on campus to give their expertise, because student organizations are really the experts in their own craft. And so I think that Bourse is a great example of when you get student voice happening and you get the demands of students to actually be heard, and it gets expressed in a very pointed way, you can create change like the telehealth service that they did. And so I think that that's why we look to Bourse in such a way, is because they've done such a great job, and that is in large part to the great work of people like Fricka. And so I think we sort of want to continue that with doing all of those things that we just outlined.
And I'll add, I thought while you were speaking that Senate also encourages senators to reach out to their constituents, but like it's been mentioned earlier, that doesn't necessarily lead to change. And so we want to reimagine the way outreach looks for Senate. We want to reimagine what it means for a senator to look to their constituents, especially their BIPOC constituents, whose voices are often not heard or not taken as seriously. And so to hold senators accountable for that and to reimagine what it looks like to reach out to their constituents is going to be a big part in making sure all voices are heard.
Great. Thank you. And then that's going to go to Andy and Michael for a one minute response.
Yeah, I think if I can start really quick, I know we only have 1 minute. I would also like to mention that Bourse is in the conversation with the president and vice president for meeting with administration, so they would, I think, regardless of who is elected, still hold a very important voice in those matters in reconnecting administration and students. I would also argue that something in Senate that has changed very recently is actually the types of senators that represent the students. So we do have a multicultural senator, we do have a gender and sexuality senator, we have an international senator that Michael has been for the last 2 years. So I think something we've thought about is what are ways that Bourse has done something like a coffee hour, how can we make it so you can meet and greet your senator? How can we create different aliases so that they can reach out consistently? How can we put accountability on elected senators to make sure they're reaching out to their constituents? Because I know, for example, the SOAP, the new working group that I plan to be a part of now that they've moved the times outside of the executive meeting, something that they've done is that the seniors reached out directly to their students and staff. The sophomore senator has not sent anything, and I think that's a disconnect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're gonna bounce right back to Andy and Michael, you guys' platform. 2 minute response, then 1 minute, or 2 minute speech, 1 minute response from you guys afterwards. So for Andy and Michael, one of the pillars of your platform is restructuring and reinvigorating past Senate initiatives. If you view these initiatives as falling short currently, how do you plan on ensuring that changes you make as president and vice president would outlive your tenure in SGA? And following in that same vein, where does restructuring these initiatives fall in priority compared to other parts of your platform?
Yeah, I'm personally really glad you asked this, because we must give reverence to Bourse, but let's be honest, Bourse gets a fraction of a percent of funding every year. We don't think Bourse is doing any less of work than any other group on campus. And the fact that they're actually going out and being one of the most proactive groups presently with such a small budget means that given the right opportunities, which we are interested in doing for them, they would be able to go and analyze much better data, perceive much better results from the students, and be able to do more. And this is where my experience as an entrepreneur and as a professional venture capitalist actually comes in. That I can reallocate budget financing in a way that reaches all of the student goals the way the students are saying it needs. Bourse needs more funding. Student orgs on a whole, for example, the music organizations, when students come in, they come in with zero funding. How are they going to present events for their communities with zero funding? These are areas that we have identified that provide a lot of excess waste that we can then repurpose for achieving goals like these. In terms of the priority in relation to other priorities that we're also trying to achieve, this at the very top, because it all trickles down based on how Senate and SGA allocates its funding. Do you want to?
I'd also mention looking at the initiatives currently, there are some that have been doing great work. Logan, who is in charge of the Textbook Project, he's done great work this year. But that's the type of initiative where money comes in and then it goes out and it's done. That's super fast. Something like STAR was given $3,800 and none of it has been spent currently. We look at Greater Than and It's On Us. I think both of them have been doing pretty good work this year, but they also haven't spent much of their budgets. They have almost $3 grand more than what Bourse is given, and that just feels like, in terms of engagement with students, there's a serious discrepancy there. So we really want to take time to find the right students who can take over those initiatives to make sure that they're long-lasting and they find their own people to help replace them in the future as well, so that a legacy grows. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute response from Hannah and Maddy.
I will say that a very important part of our platform is also increasing the funding for Bourse, and we have been in a lot of conversation, even before, obviously, campaigning with Fricka about her role in Vorst and the way in which the role can be expanded. I think some of the main things that we want to do for Vorst that are outside of what you all may be looking to do with Vorst specifically is that we want to expand the amount of time and the access that they get to the administration, or to the Board of Regents specifically. I think that there are instances in which the Board of Regents can say, we don't actually want to be talking with you anymore, we don't actually want to be consulting anymore, and so part of that is exactly what I said before, as giving a student voice, hopefully on the Board of Regents, is a goal for the future for lasting change.
Thank you very much.
Great, and then just our last directed question prior to your final statements. This one's going to go to you guys again, which is that a culminating point, or a sort of a through line as well throughout all the prongs of your platform, revolves around changing the campus culture. Can you speak to some tangible actions that you would take in that vein?
Right. One of the first things that comes to mind is the Timely Care initiative that Vorst was able to implement via a meeting with the Board of Regents this interim. That is something that has no expiration date, but may expire when the pandemic weans off, and that's the type of initiative we want to continue. We want to talk with admin and say, this is something we'd like to have permanently, so that we can alter the way people perceive mental health on campus. Another thing that's important in relation to mental health is the accessibility of Boathouse. Timely Care would help with that. And also, we have on our platform, it was a little bit humorous, but always can, always shouldn't. We are all over-involved, and I think that having a more transparent conversation to destigmatize something like the issue of mental health on campus would help people feel that others are also going through the same stress, and that would help maybe, we don't always have to be so perfect. It's hard to be perfect all the time, but the perfect only is what this college kind of tells us to be, and that is something that is quite detrimental to mental health.
I would also just like to speak on the part of that prong that's mental health and disability. I'm currently a member of the first year of TRIO for students with disabilities, and the disability accessibility services is amazing on this campus, but it is put in sort of a corner in the way that disability isn't so much of the culture of this country, and specifically the culture at St. Olaf as well. I think ableist rhetoric and ableist things that go on in this campus can greatly impact the lives of disabled students, and so part of what we want to do is make it so disabled students are able to better have representation, and that goes into the mental health resources, that goes into different things, and part of what I'm doing is also helping train the residents, the Res Life staff, on ways that they can make their programming more accessible. So doing things that are focused on accessibility is incredibly important for us to change the campus culture.
Great, thank you. And then that'll just go to Andy and Michael for 1
Can you
minute.
repeat what the prompt was?
Yes. So it's sort of the through line and the through line and the prongs of their platform. That's the word I'm looking for there. That being revolving around changing campus culture. It was speaking to tangible actions on how they would make that happen.
I can start. I know we only have a minute, really fast. I think defining what it means to be an OLI is a very interesting conversation. And in one of our points about leadership development, I think that would be one of the really key things we talk about throughout those leadership things that would happen both semesters. I think being an OLI is something that is constantly changing, and something that, especially as we move into a post-pandemic society, as we move into a society that's more accepting of others, what does that mean to be an OLI, especially here for all students? I would also say that we've spent a lot of time looking at PAC, the Political Awareness Committee. What is their role on campus? They've traditionally been programmers, but now they've turned into very much speaking on social justice issues. What does it mean to have justice on a campus? What does it mean to be equitable on a campus? And so we want to support them in that way and talk about how possibly their funding could change, possibly how their outlook could change, and how that can reflect all students.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful. So that's all the questions that we have. Thank you guys so much for engaging with those. I know I said 1 minute at the beginning, but I realized that 1 minute's kind of a very brief amount of time. So entering into closing statements, we're going to go ahead and open those up to 2 minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and start with Michael and Andy for your closing remarks from today's debate, or tonight's debate, I should say.
Would you like to start?
Yeah, I can start. So in a closing remark, I would say that our campaign runs on active engagement, inclusion, and leadership. We believe that you should look at our platform very closely to see what all of those means. We have 5 really unique points: leadership training, transparency within SGA. Financials is one that we haven't had time to talk about tonight. Michael, would you like to take the last 30 seconds to talk about that?
Yeah, I would like to close by stating that we must actually make sure that the money that is taken from students to provide SGA's budget is spent back towards students. We want to ensure that instead of the current model that branches receive their funding, wait till the end because of planning, and then spend it all in one very big and inefficient way, we want to make sure that value is provided proportionally throughout both semesters for students. We want to ensure that you're actually feeling the impact of this change on campus, and we want to make sure that you engage with us too. Hold us accountable, make sure you check out our platforms, and go out and vote on Friday, whatever your decision, and make sure you vote all the way down. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those closing remarks. We'll now turn to Hannah and Maddy for your guys' closing statement.
I will say that in our campaign, we're very focused on vision and movement of this college. Activism on this campus is always sort of a slow and fast roll that graduates from one generation of students to another and sometimes falls off. And I think with that, SGA is an institution in which it can codify that activism into a place in which it stays in the college in a way it couldn't with student organizations. And I think with that, we aren't necessarily thinking as much about funding or thinking about the sort of minutia of student government because there are so many committees and so many parts of student government that handle those things. As president and vice president, we want to be providing that vision of why can't we make this a role of SGA. And I think with that, I think we will be able to hopefully do things like put a student voice on the board of regents, do things like change programming so that that programming, when we are engaging with the student body, is religiously and accessible, is accessible to students with disabilities, is accessible to students who are overwhelmed. And I think that if you make it in a way that students can come to it and feel welcome, they will. And we want to take that disconnect between SGA and the student body now and erase that as much as we can. Because SGA can do all this great work, but if the student body isn't seeing it and engaging with it, there is truly not as much of a point, unfortunately. And I think that that is our biggest goal, is to make it so there is not a disconnect there. And I think we can help bridge that divide.
Yeah, and to that I'll add, government is a word that turns many people off. And to make student government on campus feel less like a bureaucratic process and more like a role, a place where we are advocating for you and we are hearing you and we are changing the scope of SGA to fit more with the actual needs of the students. That is what we want to do. We want to change this campus's culture, and we will disrupt the status quo by doing that.
Wonderful. Thank you all. That will conclude our debate tonight. Thank you all for coming in here. Thank